corridor was silent except for the echo of expensive heels against marble. Camilla Parker. Bowles moved through the Treasury building like she owned it. Her jaw was set, her eyes forward, and her assistant struggled to keep pace 3 steps behind. Outside, protesters chanted about the royal family's spending. Inside, Camilla had come to see something for herself. She turned a corner and stopped. There, standing in front of a heavy oak door, was a guard. Not ceremonial, not symbolic. This was James Sullivan, a Treasury security officer with 23 years of service. His uniform was pressed, his posture straight, and his expression neutral. Camilla didn't slow down. She walked right up to him. "I need to see inside," she said. Her voice was calm but firm, the kind of voice used to being obeyed. James didn't move. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This area is restricted." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, ma'am." "I do." "Then step aside." The assistant behind her shifted nervously. The air in the hallway seemed to freeze. James looked at Camilla directly, respectfully. But he didn't move an inch. "Can't do that." "Ma'am, before we continue, if you love powerful true stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now, back to the story." Camilla's expression hardened. She wasn't used to hearing the word no, especially not from someone she considered beneath her station. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "This is a royal matter. I have every right to access this office." James took a slow breath. His hands remained at his sides, relaxed but ready. "With respect, ma'am, you don't," the assistant gasped softly. Camilla's face flushed. For a moment, it seemed like she might explode. But instead, she tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Do you understand what you're doing?" She asked quietly. "Do you know what this could cost you?" James nodded once. "I do, then why?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because it's my job." The silence that followed was heavy. Camilla's assistant glanced between them, unsure whether to speak, to intervene, or to disappear entirely. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. It went unanswered. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "We'll see about that," she muttered, already dialing. James didn't respond. He simply stood there, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. He had been in this position before. Not with royalty, perhaps, but with powerful people who believed rules didn't apply to them. He knew how this would go. Camilla spoke quickly into the phone, her tone sharp and clipped. She used words like unacceptable and immediate action. No. When she hung up, she looked at James with something close to satisfaction. "Someone will be here in 5 minutes to deal with you," she said coldly. James nodded again. "Understood, ma'am." She folded her arms, clearly intending to wait right there until reinforcements arrived. Her assistant stood frozen, pretending to check her own phone. The hallway felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. But James didn't look worried. In fact, if you looked closely, there was the faintest trace of calm certainty in his eyes, like a man who knew something no one else did. And that's when footsteps began echoing from the far end of the corridor. The footsteps grew louder. Sharp, deliberate, belonging to someone who didn't hurry for anyone. Camilla straightened, confident that whoever was coming would take her side. James remained perfectly still, his face unreadable. Around the corner came Director Margaret N., the head of Treasury Security. She was 58, with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. She had worked her way up from the bottom, survived 3 government administrations, and answered to exactly one person, the law. She took in the scene immediately. Camilla, the assistant. "James at his post, Your Royal Highness," Margaret said with a polite nod. Her tone was respectful but not warm. "I understand there's a situation." Camilla gestured sharply at James. "This man is refusing to let me through. I have important business behind that door, and he's being deliberately obstructive." Margaret turned to James. "Sir Sullivan?" "Ma'am," James said simply. "I informed Her Royal Highness that this is a restricted area. Access requires proper authorization clearance, which I have not received." Margaret nodded slowly. She looked at Camilla. May I ask what business you have in the Financial Records Archive? Camilla hesitated for just a fraction of a second. It was barely noticeable, but Margaret caught it. So did James. That's confidential, Camilla said. Royal household matters. I see. Margaret clasped her hands in front of her. Unfortunately, Your Royal Highness, this facility operates under parliamentary oversight, not royal jurisdiction. The documents inside that room are protected by the Official Secrets Act and the Financial Transparency Protocols. Camilla's face darkened. I'm aware of the protocols. I'm also aware that exceptions can be made. They can, Margaret agreed. With a signed authorization from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, countersigned by the Prime Minister's office, and a formal request submitted 72 hours in advance? The assistant behind Camilla looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Camilla's voice turned icy. Are you really going to stand there and tell me that bureaucratic red tape applies to the royal family? Margaret didn't blink. I'm telling you that the law applies to everyone, ma'am, including you. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Camilla's hands trembled slightly, though whether from anger or something else was impossible to say. Do you know why I'm here? Camilla asked quietly, dangerously. I can guess, Margaret replied. And if my guess is correct, then you especially need proper authorization. Camilla's eyes flashed. Meaning what? Margaret took a small step forward. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Meaning that if there are financial discrepancies related to royal household expenditures, those records are currently under review by an independent audit committee. Any attempt to access them without authorization could be considered tampering. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Camilla's face went pale, then flushed red. That's absurd. I would never... I'm not accusing you of anything, Your Royal Highness, Margaret interrupted gently. I'm simply explaining why Officer Sullivan cannot let you through that door. He's not being difficult. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. Camilla turned back to James, as if seeing him differently now. Not as an obstacle, but as a witness. Someone who would remember this moment. Someone who could testify if needed. This isn't over, she said, her voice tight. I understand, Margaret replied. When you have the proper authorization, we'll be happy to accommodate you. Until then, I'm afraid the answer is no. Camilla stood there for 3 long seconds. Then she spun on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble. The assistant scrambled after her, relief written across her face. When they were gone, Margaret turned to James. You handled that well, she said quietly. James allowed himself a small smile. Just following procedure, ma'am. That's what makes you good at this job. She glanced at the door he was guarding. How long have you known? About the audit. James asked. 2 weeks. Margaret nodded. The press is going to have a field day when this breaks. That's above my pay grade, James said. Indeed. She studied him for a moment. You know she'll try again? Different approach. Different pressure. Let her try, James said simply. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. 3 days later, James arrived for his shift to find a formal letter waiting in his locker. It was on royal letterhead. His hands were steady as he opened it, but his heart beat a little faster. The letter was brief, professional, and devastating. It requested his immediate reassignment to a different facility, effective within 48 hours. No explanation given. James read it twice, and folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. His supervisor, Daniel Porter, was waiting outside the locker room. He looked uncomfortable. You've seen it, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. I have. Daniel ran a hand through his thinning hair. Look, James, I pushed back on this. Margaret pushed back. But the pressure is coming from very high up. They're not asking. They're demanding, and if I refuse the transfer, James asked, Daniel's expression said everything. Then they'll find another reason. Something that sticks. Something that ends your career instead of just moving it. James nodded slowly. He'd known this was coming. Powerful people didn't like being told no. They especially didn't like witnesses. Where are they sending me? He asked. Record storage facility in Leeds. Night shift. Alone. Daniel looked genuinely apologetic. It's a demotion in everything but name. Leeds was 200 miles away. James's daughter was in school here. His mother was in a care home nearby. His entire life was here. I see, James said quietly. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table and stared at the letter. His daughter, Emma, was doing homework across from him. She was 14, smart, and already too perceptive for her own good. You're quiet tonight, Dad, she said without looking up from her math textbook. Just thinking, he replied. About work? Something like that. She set down her pencil and looked at him directly. Are you in trouble? James smiled despite himself. No, sweetheart. I'm not in trouble. Then what? He hesitated. How do you explain this to a 14-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that doing the right thing sometimes costs everything? I had to make a choice at work, he said finally. Between doing what was easy and doing what was right? Emma watched him carefully. And you chose right, I did. So why do you look sad? James reached across the table and took her hand. Because sometimes doing the right thing comes with a price. What price? I might have to change jobs. Move to a different city. Emma's face fell. We'd have to move. Maybe, I don't know yet. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed his hand. Grandma says you're the most stubborn man she's ever met. She says you get it from Granddad. James laughed softly. She's not wrong. Granddad was a police officer, right? He was. And he never backed down when he knew he was right. James felt his throat tighten. No, he didn't. Emma stood up and came around the table to hug him. Then neither should you. That night, after Emma was in bed, James made a phone call. It was to an old friend, Robert Chen, who worked as an investigative journalist for The Guardian. James, Robert said, surprised. It's been years. What's going on? I need advice, James said. Off the record. Of course. Talk to me. James told him everything. The confrontation with Camilla. The restricted files. The audit. The reassignment letter. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. James, Robert said finally, do you understand what you're sitting on? I'm not sitting on anything. I'm just a guard who did his job. You're a witness to attempted evidence tampering by a member of the royal family. During an active financial investigation. That's not nothing. I don't want to be a whistleblower, James said. I just want to do my job. Then you need protection, Robert said urgently. Legal protection. Because if they're already trying to move you, it means someone is very worried about what you know. I don't know anything, James protested. I never saw what was in those files. But you know, she tried to get to them. You know when and how. That makes you a problem? James closed his eyes. This was spiraling beyond his control. What should I do? He asked. Document everything. Keep copies of that letter. Write down exactly what happened, with dates and times. And James? Yeah. Watch your back. The next morning, James returned to his post outside the archive room. Margaret met him there personally. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. You can take the transfer. No one would blame you. James shook his head. If I leave now, it looks like I did something wrong. Or it looks like you're smart enough to avoid a fight you can't win. Maybe, James said, but my daughter is watching, and I need her to see that some things are worth standing for. Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, but be prepared. This is about to get much worse. She was right, because at that exact moment, a black car was pulling up outside the Treasury building, and the person inside had come to finish what Camilla had started. The man who stepped out of the black car wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. His name was Sir Geoffrey Winters, and he was the royal family's senior legal counsel. He didn't make house calls for small problems. James was at his post when Sir Geoffrey appeared in the corridor, accompanied by two Treasury officials James didn't recognize. They looked uncomfortable. Sir Geoffrey did not. Officer Sullivan, Sir Geoffrey said smoothly, I wonder if we might have a word. I'm on duty, sir, James replied. This will only take a moment. It wasn't a request. They moved to a nearby conference room. James remained standing. Sir Geoffrey set his briefcase on the table and opened it with practiced ease. "I've been reviewing your employment file," Sir Geoffrey began. "Impressive record. 23 years of service. Multiple commendations. No disciplinary actions." James said nothing. It would be unfortunate to see that record damaged over a misunderstanding. "There's no misunderstanding," James said calmly. "I followed protocol." Sir Geoffrey smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Protocol, yes. Let's discuss that." He pulled out a document. "According to Treasury regulations, security officers have discretionary authority to grant access in emergency situations. Would you agree? In certain circumstances, yes. And visits by members of the royal family could reasonably be considered time-sensitive matters requiring discretion." James saw where this was going. Only if there's a legitimate emergency. There wasn't one. That's a matter of interpretation, isn't it? Sir Geoffrey's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "What if I told you that Her Royal Highness was acting on behalf of His Majesty the King, conducting authorized royal household business? I'd ask to see the written authorization."
Ow.
Sir Geoffrey's smile tightened. "Some matters are too sensitive for paperwork, Officer Sullivan. Surely you understand that. I understand that without proper documentation, I can't grant access to restricted areas. Those are the rules." "Rules," Sir Geoffrey repeated, as if tasting the word. He closed the folder. "Let me be direct. The royal household is prepared to acknowledge that there may have been a communication error. No fault on your part. No fault on theirs. Simply a bureaucratic mishap that can be quietly corrected." "Corrected how?" James asked. "You accept the transfer to Leeds. A generous relocation package will be provided. Significantly above standard. Enough to ensure your daughter attends an excellent school. Enough to cover your mother's care facility indefinitely." The room was silent. "We're talking about your family's future," Sir Geoffrey continued softly. "Your daughter's education, your mother's comfort, your own financial security. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and accept the transfer." James looked at the document Sir Geoffrey was sliding across the table. The number at the bottom had a lot of zeros. "And if I refuse?" James asked. Sir Geoffrey's pleasant expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. "Then things become complicated. Questions might arise about your judgment, your fitness for duty. Old incidents might be re-examined in a new light." "And what incidents?" "My record is clean. Records can be surprisingly subjective," Sir Geoffrey said. "A commendation for quick thinking could be reframed as reckless behavior. A tough decision could look like an abuse of authority. Given the right context, even the most innocent actions can appear questionable." James felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "You're threatening me." "I'm offering you a choice," Sir Geoffrey corrected. "Take the generous offer and protect your family's future. Or refuse and face an uncertain outcome that benefits no one."
Ow.
James stared at the document. That money could change everything. Emma could go to university without debt. His mother could stay in her care home without him worrying about the bills. He could retire in 10 years instead of 15. All he had to do was pretend the last week hadn't happened. "I need to think about it," James said finally. Sir Geoffrey checked his watch. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires and other measures begin." That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Emma's hug, her words about his father, the look of trust in her eyes. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to do the right thing even when it was hard. He thought about the man he'd been at 25, fresh out of the military, determined to serve with honor, and he thought about the man he'd be if he signed that document at 3 in the morning. He got out of bed and wrote 2 letters. One to Sir Geoffrey, declining the offer. One to Robert Chen, his journalist friend, outlining everything that had happened. When morning came, he put the first letter in the mail. He kept the second one sealed in an envelope, with instructions to his solicitor to deliver it to Robert if anything happened to him. Then he went to work. Sir Geoffrey was waiting in Margaret's office when James arrived. "I assume you've made your decision," Sir Geoffrey said. James handed him the envelope. Sir Geoffrey opened it, read the brief note inside, and his expression hardened. "You're making a terrible mistake," maybe James said. "But it's my mistake to make. This will cost you everything, and that's the price." Sir Geoffrey stood, gathering his briefcase. At the door, he paused. "You think you're a hero, Officer Sullivan? But heroes don't win against people like us. They just make themselves feel righteous while they lose." After he left, Margaret sat down heavily. "He's right, you know. They'll come after you with everything they have. I know, so I do it." James thought about Emma, about his father, about every person who'd ever stood in front of a door. They were paid to guard, and decided that some things mattered more than convenience. "'Cause someone has to," he said. Simply what James didn't know was that his decision was about to trigger a chain of events that would reach far beyond one hallway in the Treasury building, because that same afternoon, an envelope arrived at the Guardian's offices, and everything changed. The envelope that arrived at the Guardian wasn't from James. It was from someone inside the Treasury, someone who had been watching everything unfold, someone who believed the public had a right to know what their tax money was funding. Robert Chen opened it at his desk and found documents. Lots of them. Financial records, expenditure reports, emails, and a cover letter explaining that these were copies made before certain files mysteriously went missing. From the archive room James had been guarding, Robert's hands shook as he read. The numbers were staggering. Over £4 million in undocumented royal household expenses over 3 years. Private jets billed as official travel. Personal renovations classified as security upgrades. Shopping trips disguised as diplomatic necessities. And Camilla's signature on dozens of authorization forms. Robert immediately called his editor. Within an hour, the paper's legal team was reviewing everything. Within 2 hours, they were preparing questions for Buckingham Palace. Within 3 hours, word had leaked that something big was coming. James knew none of this. He was at his post. Like always, when 2 men in suits approached him, they weren't Treasury security. They were Metropolitan Police. "James Sullivan," the first one asked. "Yes, we need you to come with us. Questions regarding a security breach at this facility." Margaret appeared instantly. "What breach?" "I'm the director of security here, and I've authorized no investigation." The second officer handed her a document. "This comes from the Home Office. We have authorization to detain Officer Sullivan for questioning regarding unauthorized access to classified materials." James felt his stomach drop. This was it. They were going to frame him. "I haven't accessed anything," James said clearly. "I've been guarding that door, not opening it." "That's what we need to discuss," the first officer said. His tone wasn't hostile, just professional. But James knew how this worked. Once you were in that room answering questions, the truth became whatever they needed it to be. Margaret stepped between them. "Officer Sullivan isn't going anywhere without legal representation present. He's not under arrest. Just questioning, then he can decline to go." The officers exchanged glances. "We can arrest him if necessary." "On what charge?" They hesitated. They didn't have one. Not yet. They were fishing, hoping James would panic and say something incriminating. "I'll go," James said quietly. "But I want everything recorded, and I want a union representative present." 3 hours later, James sat in a small interview room, his union rep beside him. Facing 2 detectives who seemed uncomfortable with their assignment, they asked about his access to the archive room, his interactions with Camilla, whether he'd made copies of anything, whether he'd spoken to journalists. James answered every question honestly. No, he hadn't accessed the files. No, he hadn't made copies. He'd spoken to a friend who happened to be a journalist, but only for advice, not to leak information. The detectives seemed almost relieved by his answers. They were going through the motions, James realized. Someone had ordered this interrogation. But these men weren't invested in destroying him. After 2 hours, they let him go. "Stay available," one detective said as James stood to leave. "We may have follow-up questions." James walked out of the police station into the evening light. His phone had 17 missed calls. Most were from his supervisor. 2 were from Robert Chen. He called Robert first. James, where have you been? Robert sounded frantic. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Police interview. What's going on? We're running the story tomorrow. Front page. Royal financial scandal. Millions in undocumented spending. Palace is in crisis mode. They know it's coming. James sat down on a bench outside the station. Robert, I didn't leak anything. It wasn't you. But you're going to be part of the story. The guard who said no. The man who stood his ground when they tried to hide the evidence. I didn't want this, James said quietly. I know, but it's bigger than you now. Robert's voice softened. James, you need to prepare yourself. Tomorrow morning, when this breaks, your name is going to be everywhere. You're going to be a hero to some people and a traitor to others. James closed his eyes. I just wanted to do my job. You did. And because you did, the truth is coming out. That matters. When James got home that night, Emma was waiting up for him. Dad, there are reporters outside, she said, worried. They've been knocking on the door, asking about you. James hugged her tight. I know, sweetheart. It's going to be crazy for a few days. But it'll be okay. What did you do? I didn't do anything wrong, he assured her. I just did my job. But sometimes that's enough to make people angry. The reporter said, you're a hero. James pulled back to look at her. What do you think? Emma studied his face for a moment. I think you're my dad. And you did what Granddad would have done. That was all James needed to hear. The next morning, the Guardian story exploded across every news outlet in Britain. By noon, Camilla had cancelled all public appearances. By afternoon, Parliament was demanding a full inquiry. By evening, protests had erupted outside Buckingham Palace, and James's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He ignored most of the calls. But when Margaret called, he answered. James, she said, you need to see something. Turn on the news. He did. On screen was a press conference. And speaking at the podium, defending him by name, was someone James never expected to stand up for a simple security guard. It was the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself. Officer Sullivan acted with integrity and professionalism, the Chancellor was saying. He followed the law when others attempted to circumvent it. He deserves our thanks, not persecution. James stared at the screen, hardly believing it. Emma came and stood beside him. Dad, you're famous! I don't want to be famous, James said. But famous he was, and the story was far from over. 6 weeks later, the dust still hadn't settled. Parliament's inquiry was in full swing. 3 senior royal household officials had resigned. The king himself had issued a public statement promising complete transparency and accountability in royal finances, and James Sullivan was still standing outside that archive room door. He'd been offered promotions, media appearances, book deals. He'd declined them all. The transfer order to Leeds had been quietly withdrawn. The reassignment letter mysteriously disappeared from his file, sir. Geoffrey Winters had been notably absent from public view. But the real story? The one that mattered to James happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. He was at his post when Margaret approached with someone unexpected, Camilla's former assistant. The young woman who had stood frozen in that hallway weeks ago. Officer Sullivan, Margaret said formally. This is Miss Rebecca Thornton. She'd like to speak with you. James looked at Rebecca. She was nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. I'm not supposed to be here, Rebecca said quietly. But I needed to tell you something. Okay, James said gently. Rebecca glanced around, making sure they were alone. That day when Her Royal Highness asked you to step aside, I was terrified. I'd been working for her for 2 years, and I'd seen what happened to people who said no to her. What happened to them? James asked. They disappeared. Different jobs, different departments, different lives. She never did it directly, but it always happened. Rebecca's voice shook slightly. I watched you refuse her, and I thought you were insane. I thought you'd destroyed your career. Some people would say I did, James said with a slight smile. But you didn't. Rebecca looked at him with something like wonder. You're still here. You're still standing. And she's the one who had to answer for what she did. I just followed the rules, James said. No, Rebecca shook her head firmly. You did more than that. You showed people like me that it's possible to say no, that rules matter, that one person can make a difference. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. This is my resignation letter to the royal household. I'm submitting it today. I'm done being part of a system that treats people like obstacles. James was surprised. What will you do? I don't know yet, Rebecca admitted. But I know I can't go back to who I was before I saw you stand your ground. She extended her hand. Thank you, Officer Sullivan. James shook it. Good luck, Miss Thornton. After she left, Margaret stood beside James in companionable silence. You know you've become something of a legend, Margaret said. The guard who said no to royalty and lived to tell about it. I don't feel like a legend, James said. I feel tired. Margaret laughed softly. That's how you know you did something real. Legends and stories don't get tired, but real people who do hard things always do. That evening, James returned home to find Emma at the kitchen table, working on a school project. What's that? He asked. History assignment, Emma said. We had to write about someone we admire and why. James felt his heart squeeze. Who did you choose? Emma looked up at him with a smile. You sweetheart, I'm not exactly historical. The assignment said someone we admire. It didn't say they had to be dead. She pushed the paper toward him. Want to read it? James sat down and read his daughter's essay. She'd written about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's hard, about how her father had taught her that ordinary people can be heroes if they have the courage to stand firm. By the time he finished, his eyes were blurry. This is really good, he managed. It's true, Emma said simply. That's what makes it good. 3 months after the confrontation, the parliamentary inquiry released its findings. There had been systematic financial mismanagement in the royal household. Accountability measures would be implemented. Independent oversight would be established, and in a brief footnote on page 47, James Sullivan was commended for his exemplary adherence to duty and protocol in the face of significant pressure. It wasn't much. Just a line in a report that most people would never read. But James cut it out and pinned it to the bulletin board in the security office. Next to his father's old police badge, 5 years later, James was still at his post. He'd been promoted to senior security officer, but he'd turned down desk jobs. He liked standing watch. He liked being the person who made sure rules meant something. One afternoon, a young security guard named Marcus approached him nervously. Officer Sullivan, sir, can I ask you something? Of course, James said. There's this person, very important, demanding access to a restricted area. They're making threats, saying I'll lose my job. Marcus looked scared. What should I do? James smiled. He'd been waiting for this question for 5 years. Tell me exactly what happened, he said. As Marcus explained the situation, James listened carefully. When the young man finished, James put a hand on his shoulder. Marcus, I'm going to tell you what my father told me when I first became a security officer. Your job isn't to make powerful people happy. Your job is to stand between what's protected and anyone who shouldn't access it. Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes it costs you something. But if you do it right, if you stand firm when it matters, you'll be able to look yourself in the mirror. Even if it costs me my job, Marcus asked. Even then, James said firmly, because some things matter more than jobs. Your integrity is one of them. Gus took a deep breath. Then I'll tell them no. Good man, James said. And Marcus, if they give you trouble, come find me. You won't face it alone. As Marcus walked away with renewed confidence, Margaret appeared beside James, still mentoring the next generation. She asked, Someone has to, James replied. You know, you could have written a book, made a fortune telling your story. James shook his head. The story's not about me. It's about the principle. The moment I make it about me, I become just another person cashing in, noble Margaret observed. Impractical, but noble. I sleep well at night, James said with a shrug. That evening, as James walked to his car, he passed the same hallway where everything had started. The oak door was still there, still guarded, still protecting what needed protecting. He paused for a moment, remembering Camilla's face, the click of her heels, the weight of that decision. And he thought about all the small decisions every person makes every day. The moments when you choose between easy and right, between silence and speaking up, between bending and standing firm. Most of those moments go unnoticed. They don't make headlines. They don't change history, but they change the person making them. And sometimes, just sometimes, one person standing firm is enough to remind everyone else that it's possible that night. James tucked Emma into bed even though she was 19 and home from university for the weekend. "I'm not 10, she protested, laughing. "Humor me," James said. "What's got you sentimental?" she asked. James thought about it. "I was just remembering the day you told me Granddad would be proud." "It would be," Emma said softly. "You know that, right?" "I hope so," James said. Emma sat up and hugged him. "Dad, you're the bravest person I know. Not because you stood up to someone powerful, but because you stood up for something that mattered, even when it would have been easier not to." "That's what your grandfather taught me," James said. "And what you taught me," Emma replied. Years later, when people asked James about that day in the hallway, he never portrayed himself as a hero. He'd simply been a man doing his job, following the rules, standing where he was supposed to stand. But those who knew him understood the truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay where you are. Hold your ground and say one simple word: no. And sometimes that's enough to change everything.